Mind freak.
Okay, stop.
What? Oh, we don't know.
No, I'm not.
Oh, great Odin's raven!
I did. That's dry down.
Oh, cute. So we're filming that. Get Olive.
Future interior designer.
Not gonna be an interior designer.
Exterior designer. Okay. A good experiment has two types of variables. What we call the independent variable and what we call the dependent variable. This is important. This is something that's often confused, and it's not that difficult. The independent variable is what you as an experimenter control. The dependent variable is usually the result or the measurement you take. So independent variable, a variable that an experimenter manipulates. For instance, if I was trying to see what's the best amount of water to water a plant, what I might do is I might get 10 plants. I might give the first plant no water, the second plant a teaspoon a day, the third plant 2 teaspoons a day. You see what I'm saying? And just go on up the board. 3 teaspoons, 4 teaspoons, and then measure their growth. Measure their growth each day for 2 weeks. That's a pretty simple experiment. It's not that good of an experiment, but it's an experiment. So my independent variable is what I'm controlling. What am I controlling in my experiment? What is under my control?
Amount of water.
The amount of water each plant is getting. I control which ones get what amount of water. So the amount of water would be the independent variable. Now, is every plant going to grow the same, do you think?
No.
So the plant getting no water is probably not going to grow very much. The plant getting a lot more water might, on up the road. So the amount of growth is the dependent variable. That's kind of the result of the experiment. And the way you should think about it is the growth, the amount of growth depends on the amount of water. Right? That's why they call it the dependent variable. The amount of growth depends on something. It depends on how much water you gave each plant. That's why they call it the dependent variable. So the independent variable you control, and the dependent variable is what you measure. Make sensey?
No.
You're going to have to come up with an experiment that has an independent variable and a dependent variable, and you're going to have to define those to me in your little 300-word write-up of what your experiment's going to be. If you're testing the effect of 3 different types of music on plant growth, which is what several groups have come to me about, I don't know. I don't want everybody doing that experiment, but anyway. Different types of music's effect on plant growth. Or no, y'all aren't doing it on plant growth. Y'all are doing it on people. Test taking or something like that. Okay, different types of music's effect on people's test taking. What's the independent variable? What are you controlling as an experimenter?
The music.
The music.
The volume.
You're giving them either no music, or rock and roll, or rap, or classical, or whatever. I don't know. Or you could say you can control the volume of the music. That's probably a better experiment because you just got one variable. You either make it soft or medium or loud, same kind of music each time. Or no music. That's probably a better experiment. When you start using different types of music, you start adding in more variables. Because rock has different number of words, different beat, different instruments. That's a lot of variables there, and it's hard to figure out which one is affecting the test taking. Anyway, so you need to understand what independent and dependent variable mean. I'm skipping some of this. Some of this we don't need to talk about. Every experiment needs a control. A control is a group in your experiment that is not exposed to whatever it is you're changing. The control for my plant experiment would be the plant that doesn't get any water. The control for the music experiment is the group of people that don't listen to music. You have some variable that you're changing, and there needs to be a group that isn't exposed to the variable at all. That's a control group. Some experiments it's easy to do a control group, just have a plant that gets no water. But some experiments it's a little bit more difficult. But a control group is very important. I thought I had something. A control group is very important because of something we call the placebo effect. And they talk in the reading that you'll do tonight about this experiment. Y'all know what Viagra is? Viagra is the boner pill. You see, when you get old, for men,
Why did it say
you have trouble becoming sexually aroused. What's that?
Why did the graph say for women?
Well, we're going to talk about that. Let me get to it. I know you're excited.
It says.
It's a joke.
I just cut that.
So here's this experiment. So if you become an old man and you can't really have sex anymore, there's now, it used to be you're just out of luck, but now you can go buy a pill, Viagra, and you take it and then you can have sex again. You can become aroused. It makes it easy to become aroused. I'm not sure how it works, but it's one of the best-selling drugs in the history of mankind.
It increases
The people who discovered it were actually doing research on blood pressure medication. And whenever you come up with a new medication, you give it to a certain group, and you have them take it, and they check their blood pressure each day. But they also write down any side effects that they're having. And so they were giving this drug to this group of people, and the people were writing down, and one of the side effects that they kept hearing from people was, well, yeah, my blood pressure's down a little bit, and my sex life is unbelievable. And they heard that from several people, and they said, wait a second, we might have something here. And they now are sitting on their own island somewhere, drinking martinis, because they're rich. But anyway, so of course, if you own Viagra, you may be interested in this idea. Does it work on women? Does it help women's sex life? Because it's also true that when you become an old woman, you're not that interested anymore either. So if a woman takes it, does it help her sex life? They wanted to do an experiment to find out. And they did an experiment. They gave a group of women Viagra, and they asked them how it helped their sex life. And guess what? A lot of them reported, yeah, it really helped. But you have to have a control group. And they did, luckily. They had another group of women not taking Viagra, taking a placebo, which is a sugar pill or a pill that they think it's Viagra, but it's not. They say, here you go, here's some Viagra. And the woman goes, thank you, I have Viagra now. And she takes it, she thinks it's Viagra. And guess what? The placebo group also reported that it really helped their sex life. And you can see the results. Actually, a little bit more people from the placebo group said the Viagra helped their sex life than did the Viagra group. And we're not talking about a small portion. We're talking about 42% reported improvement with the placebo. So see, they were taking this drug that they thought was Viagra, and so they're thinking it should be helping them, so it helps them. I guess it gets them more aroused thinking about sex or something, taking this drug. And so that they reported improvement too. So what you conclude from this is that the Viagra doesn't do anything.
It makes you worse.
Or maybe it even makes you worse a little bit. But you don't conclude that it really helps. And after you do an experiment like that, you can't then market it to women. You can't say this will also help women, because the evidence is that it doesn't. Now think of what you would have concluded if you didn't have a control group.
Oh, it definitely helps with it.
You would have said, oh man, it helps 42% of women.
Think
And that's what you find in a lot of these pills, that where you see on the bottom, they'll have a commercial and they'll say, so-and-so taking this really helps this problem. And at the very bottom, in little small writing, they'll say these statements are not regulated by the FDA. You ever see that? And that means they probably did it without a control group, any experiments that they did, because they know about the placebo effect. And the drugs that you see advertised that say not regulated by the FDA are probably not doing good experiments, and they're reporting results that are based on the placebo effect, not the actual effect of their drug. And it's not illegal to do that. And talk about money. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year around the world are spent on drugs like that do nothing. Not just thousands or millions, hundreds of billions. It is a huge industry. Every other commercial is something that's not regulated by the FDA. To me, it's criminal. You know, don't run that kind of thing if you know it doesn't work. They're just trying to get your money. But it's not illegal according to our laws, so what's to stop companies from doing it? So that's an important thing to know. If you learn nothing else from this class, that should be it. Understand what the placebo effect is, and beware of anything that's advertised that says not regulated. You've got to have something regulating your companies, making sure they're doing good experiments. Now the thing is, on men, when you do this experiment, the Viagra helps like 80 or 90% of men, and the placebo only helps 40%. So the Viagra is working on the men very well. So Viagra does work. And guys, you can look forward to that when you're old. And maybe ladies, they'll come up with some for y'all too. So here's an interesting experiment that they talk about. That's kind of cool. Hypothesis. Nicotine impairs driving ability. What do you think? How many smokers in here? Just raise your hand. Just one? I see y'all leaving the parking lot, lighting up as soon as y'all leave. I know. Well, does nicotine impair driving ability? Does it make you a worse driver? Well, the hypothesis doesn't say that smoking impaired driving ability. It says, does nicotine? So, if you were testing does smoking impair driving ability, you'd probably have one group that's smoking while they're driving, and another group that's not smoking while they're driving. You see?
But you can't tell what it's saying.
But this is different. This is saying, does nicotine affect driving ability? So what you do here is you have two groups. They're both smoking. One group is smoking normal cigarettes that have nicotine, and another group are smoking fake cigarettes. They're cigarettes that light up and burn, but there's no nicotine in there. Such things can be made. How would you want those? For experiments, I guess. So, do you want to really let them go out and count how many crashes they have?
No.
It's probably not a very ethical thing to do. You have to consider ethics when you're doing psychology experiments. And it's probably not an ethical thing to do to say, okay, you're in this group and you're going to smoke and go drive and smoke. And if it causes more crashes, too bad. No, you have them use a driving simulator or be on some closed course or weave in and out of things and count how many cones they hit or something like that. In this experiment, they used a driving simulator like a video game. They counted the number of collisions. And then they checked to see if there's a difference between the two groups, you see. And I don't even know what they found out. And I don't think our book tells us. That would be interesting to know, though. I don't know. I don't know what happened. Now, random assignment is something you should know about. If you're doing an experiment, you should randomly assign people to your groups. You shouldn't pick them, and you want to make sure that there's randomness involved, because if you're not doing it randomly, you could end up with one group being better than another group for some reason. Okay? So you want to randomly assign. So a good way to do it is just to give everybody a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and pull out of a hat and say, okay, the control group's going to be this, 1, 5, 8, 6. The test group's going to be 2, 3, 7, 9, or whatever. And so you randomly assign your groups. You don't tell them what group they're in, though. They can't know that they're in the control group, then they know that they're taking a placebo. And you want to use a procedure that's called double blind. Have you ever heard of that? You want to use what's called blinding procedures. Blinding procedures are these. Blind means you don't know something. And so if I'm not telling you what group you're in, you are blind to that. That's called a single blinding procedure.
I can't see.
Okay? So that means you don't know if you're in the control or the experimental group. Double blind, if you're doing a double blind experiment, that means I don't know which group you're in. You see? Even though I'm running the experiment, I don't know if you're in the control group or the experimental group. What I do is I hire somebody else to make the groups. And they'll pick who's in what group, and they'll write it down and keep it on a sheet of paper locked up in a cabinet somewhere. So I don't know if you're in the control group or the experimental group. And then you do the experiment, and I count up your data, and I say, okay, number 5, let's pretend you're number 5, JD.
Right.
Number 5 had this many crashes, or hit this many cones, or whatever. And if I don't know if he's in the control group or the experimental group, then there's no way I can bias my opinion. For instance, if I'm a scientist that wants Viagra to work for women, I might say, oh, this person's in the experimental group. You're not a woman, but oh, this person's in the experimental group. I'm testing. If she says no, it didn't work for me, I might. If I know she's in the experimental group and I want Viagra to work, I might say, "You sure it didn't work for you? Not even a little bit?" I might bias my findings, or maybe mark her up a notch, even though she's saying it didn't work. You don't want to bias your own experiment. So the way you do that is double blind. You get everybody to give you you get your data from everybody in your groups, and then you give it to the guy that made the groups, and he puts the data with each correct group and totals it up. So you taking the data don't bias the data. Does that make sense?
Or if the other person wants the same thing that you do.
Yeah, he's got to be blind too to
triple blind.
see, you've already taken the numbers. You're taking the data. So he's blind to what your numbers were. Okay? So as long as you say number 5 was this number, then he inputs the number 5. As long as he's not cheating on the numbers and inputs the number 5. Or you can have a computer do it instead of a guy. You can have the computer divide up and you put in what the results are, and then the computer puts them together in groups. So you got to be careful about that. We call that a double blind study. So whenever you're reading about a study that was done on a drug or anything, you want to look for that. See if it's a double blind study. That means the experimenters didn't know who was in what group, and the people taking it also didn't know who was in what group. Those are the best experiments. Okay? So I want you to read about experiments, page 24 through 28. And we're going to start a video here on experiments.
Keep videoing?
Yeah. No, you can turn off that video.
Say bye, JD.
Hi.